Hello everyone. Let us discuss JDBC architecture. In this video, we have to see the architecture of JDBC and how to connect database with the Java program. At the right hand side, the architecture of JDBC is shown in the figure. This figure has different components. At the upper side or at the very outer side there is an application, and that application is a Java applet, or you can say servlet. So that will communicate with our data source. Now JDBC API is the next layer of this architecture, and it contains the classes, methods, and interfaces which will allow Java program to execute SQL statements that will retrieve the results from the database. Some of the important classes and interfaces defined in JDBC are as follows. You can say, for example, driver manager, driver connection statement, prepared statement, callable statement, result set, and SQL data. These are some of the classes and methods and interfaces. We have to retrieve the results from the databases, and for that we require to provide these all classes and interfaces with the JDBC API. Now the next is a JDBC driver manager. So what is that? The driver manager plays an important role in the JDBC architecture. What it does, the driver manager uses some database specific drivers that will effectively connect enterprise application to the database. So number of architecture JDBC architecture has having the database specific drivers. So all these drivers will be reside in the JDBC device manager, and those will be get connected with the all the applications, for example SQL Server, for example Oracle, or any data source like MS Access. Now in between of these, the JDBC drivers will help us to communicate with all these data sources through the JDBC. We need a JDBC driver that will contain intelligently interact with the respective data source. So all these resources may be for all the databases like SQL Server, Oracle, or MS Access. All these will be get connected with the JDBC driver, and the JDBC driver will intelligently interact with these all data sources with the driver manager. So that is the architecture of JDBC. Now, what are the types of the JDBC architecture? There are two types of JDBC architecture. The first is a two-tier and second is a three-tier. So what is the two-tier model? In this model, a Java application will directly communicate with the data source, and JDBC driver provides communication between the application and the data source. When a user sends a query to data source, the answers to those queries will be given to the user in the form of results. So we can locate these data sources on the different machines on the network to which a user is connected. This will called a client server configuration, in which the user's machine acts as a client and the machine with that data source will act as a server. So that data source will reside at the somewhere on another machine that will be called as a server. The server will provide this data, and the user will get connected with the client, so that machine where user is working. That is a two-tier model. Their Java application will directly communicate with the data source. But in three-tier model, the query of the user goes to the middle tier services. From the middle tier services, the command will again reach to the data source. The result of this query go back to the middle tier. From there, it will finally goes to the user. This type of model is beneficial for the management information system directors. Like MIS directors are working with the company. So three-tier model will work for these MIS managers, or you can say MIS directors, where the middle tier services will work with the data source as well as the client machine. Most of the time, the client machine will request to the server, but the middle tier services will provide some security whether the client will be having the information which is really required to the client, and the server is having that information that will be get to the client machine, and middle tier services will check that all information. So what are the prerequisites of JDBC? The JDBC is having some prerequisites. Prior to JDBC connection to the database, we have to require JDBC, that is Java Development Kit. Second thing, that Oracle database, we have to download it from http://www.oracle.com. All this URL is specified here. Then the third thing, that is JDBC driver for Oracle database, you have to download it from this particular service of oracle.com. And these all will be get added to the OJDBC 6.jar to the project library. So these are the prerequisites of JDBC. What are the steps to connect Java program and database? These are the 5 steps which we are going to discuss. The 5 steps in Java program to connect with the database. The first is loading the driver, second to create the connections, third to create the statement, fourth execute the query, and fifth close the connections. Let us discuss one by one. The first is loading the driver. The loading the driver will be the first step where we can connect with the database. We first need to load the driver or register it before using it in the program. There should be some registration. Once in your program, you can register a driver in any of the two ways. So we have to register some of the drivers, and those drivers, how we can get register with two ways. A, class.forName. In this, we load the driver's class file into memory during the runtime. There is no need to use a new operator for the creation of an object. The following shows the use of the class.forName to load the Oracle driver. This is the statement which will require to get to load the Oracle driver in our program. Class.forName in bracket in double quotation oracle.jdbc.driver.oracle driver double quotation complete parenthesis complete semicolon. And the second registration with the another way, driver manager dot register driver. So the driver manager is an inbuilt class of Java which will come with the static member register. we can call the drivers class constructor at the compile time. The following example shows the use of driver manager dot register driver to register the Oracle driver. For example, driver manager dot register driver in bracket new oracle dot jdbc dot driver dot oracle driver. So that will complete our two-way of registering a driver with the program. Second, that we have to create the connections. So now, after loading these drivers in our previous slide, we need to establish connections using the following code. The code shows the connection con is equal to driver manager dot get connection in bracket url comma user comma password bracket complete. What is the user? In the bracket, the arguments are there: url, user and password. User will be the user name from which SQL command prompt can be accessed. The next password, that password from which SQL command prompt can be accessed. And con will be reference to connection interface. So this is very important thing to keep in mind, that con will be the reference to the connection interface. Next is a URL, that is uniform resource locator. We can create it as follows. For example, string URL is equal to, in double quotation, JDBC colon oracle colon thin colon at the rate localhost colon 1521 colon xe double quotation complete. What is this all? Let us discuss. Where Oracle is the database, thin is the driver, thin which is written here. Let us see the thin, it is written here. The at the rate localhost is the IP address where the database is stored. 1521 is the port number. 1521 is the port number, and XE is the service provider. All three parameters are of string type, and the programmer should declare them before calling the functions. So this is very important statement we have to place in string URL. So here we have placed the URL. So in this URL, you have to give this all clear text which is shown here. So this will be placed here. And then the user will be the username from which the SQL command prompt can be accessed, and password we have to show here, and the password which SQL command prompt can be accessed. The con is written here. The con is written here where it will refer to the connection interface. This will refer to the connection interface, and this is the URL we have to give uniform resource locator, that is URL in the sense that it is some sort of a website address. So website address we have to place in double quotation. So everything inside this double quotation is discussed and explained here in our sentences. The third, we have to create a statement. So once we have to establish a connection, you can interact with the database. So what are those creation of the statements? The JDBC statement, the callable statement and prepared statement interfaces defines the method that allows to send the SQL commands and receive data from the database. So use of this JDBC statement is as follows. You can just say statement is equal to con dot create statement. Now here con is the reference to the connection interface that will be used in the previous step. So con is the reference to the connection interface. This is the connection interface. So that will create a statement. So this is important statement when we are creating a connection with the database. Now fourth step is an execute the query. The most crucial part is executing the query. Here the query is an SQL query. Every time we are using the SQL query. So we have to keep in mind that we know all the SQL statements. Firstly, we have to prepare. Now, as we know that we can have multiple types of queries, some of them are as follows. The query for updating or inserting the tables in the database, and the query for retrieving the data from the database. Now, the execute query method of this statement interface will execute the queries for retrieving the values from the database. So execute query method will used for retrieving the values from the database. So the execute query method will return the object of result set that we can use to get all the records of the table. So result set will give all the records, whatever the records we are placing in the SQL query, that will be displayed to the programmer. The lastly, that is the closing the connection. We have to send the data to the specified location, but we are about to complete our task that we have to get connection to be closed. We need to close this connection. So by closing the connection, objects of the statement and result set interface are automatically closed. The close method of connection interface closes this connection. For example, con.close will execute and closes all the connection with the database. So program will be disconnected from the database and everything will be get closed. So the objects of the statement and the result set interface will be automatically closed by using this statement, that is con.close. Thank you very much for watching this video. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay home.